There's some additional diets that I'll just briefly touch on. Eliminating other food sensitivities like I mentioned earlier. Eliminating the phenols and the salicylates as needed can be very helpful. And then the low oxalate diet is often used if there's a great website called lowoxalate.info, and that's Susan Owen's website, and she goes into a lot of stories or case studies of children and adults that have gotten benefit. She said they've seen growth spurts for a child that kind of the growth goes kind of flat for a while, big growth spurts for some kids, as well as kids that have a lot of urinary irritation and things like that. These are the things that create kidney stones. So if you have a child that seems to be really irritated or uncomfortable, then this often is a diet that they've seen some benefit to that. It also can help eradicate what we're feeling and thinking is that this inflammation of the oxalates can keep the yeast perpetuating even though you're trying to get rid of it. And so by taking out the oxalates, sometimes we see some of that, the yeast and the gut be able to heal better. Okay, so let's go into some nutrition boosters here. So this is the chart I showed earlier, but just in a different form. And the reason I just wanted to throw this in was we need good nutrients. And we're going to spend 95% of the conversation today about food, because this is an area that you as parents have a direct impact every day. You don't have to be scientists, you don't have to get lab tests, you don't have to figure out what nutrients are deficient, you can just work on good nutrition. But to give you a sense of why these good nutrients are so important and why some people will do nutritional supplementation as well, is that when you look at this, so this pathway that does the recycling up here, you need the folic acid, but as I mentioned earlier, you need it in the form of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, which means the body has to go through a series of processes in order to get that there. And that requires all sorts of things. It requires certain minerals and nutrients and precursors to help you get that, or cofactors, to get those nutrients down those pathways. So it's not just one nutrient you need. It could be a dozen or a half a dozen nutrients needed just for that one nutrient, just for that one part of that little pathway. We need B6, magnesium, zinc, substances often that are very low in studies that they've done for children on the autism spectrum. And so when we look at food, how do we get more nutrition in our children? We want to maximize every bite we can to get as much nutrition in them as possible so that we can get these pathways to work as well as we can. So here are just some of the healthful supplements that parents do. It's a long list. I don't necessarily suggest that you go out and implement or start all of these, but I'll just give you some ideas of some things that have been helpful. Digestive enzymes can help with digestion greatly. Probiotics. If you can't get the fermented foods in, you can do supplements of probiotics. These are those good bacteria. Cod liver oil with the vitamin A. This is what Mary Megson did to boost up the vitamin A in children, or other fatty acids or fish oils. Magnesium, calcium, zinc, these important minerals that are often low. B6, essential. One of the first pioneers in all of this was Dr. Bernard Rimland, and he did a lot of studies on B6 and magnesium, and so you may have actually heard about some of those, and they are often very, very helpful, this nutrient. Antioxidants, methylation supplements like B12, folic acid, those sorts of things. Looking at other immune system boosters, amino acids, depending on what an individual needs. These can all be helpful. But it is beneficial to be targeted. It's hard to get supplements into kids, and you don't want to do supplements you don't need to do. You can start with some of the real basics or seek out somebody that can help you be more targeted in your approach. So nutrient-dense foods. So we want to look at what are some of these? This is just a small list of some foods. Sweet potatoes, all the nutrients and the fiber in sweet potatoes. Leafy green vegetables. Now, I know probably some of you are looking at this list thinking, there's no way I'm going to get my child to eat leafy greens and so I have a couple thoughts for you. One is that when you're addicted to gluten and casein, you want nothing but milk, cheese, grilled cheese, pizza, macaroni and cheese all day long because it creates an addiction. When you get those addictive foods out, suddenly there's a whole world of foods available, and I've heard stories of children that have eaten vegetables for the first time after getting rid of these, or meat much more often once they get rid of those problematic foods. So hold out hope that your children might actually eat these vegetables, and we can also find ways of sneaking them in the diet as we need to. So how do we do that? Well, pureeing them is one of the best ways to do that. And so we're going to look at things in the afternoon and things like meatballs, and we're going to do some sampling later of just puree some vegetables. Meatballs and smoothies are my two favorite ways of getting nutrients into kids. And so if you can get them to eat those foods, even if they're not eating them now, if you go home and you work on getting them to eat some sort of blended drink or meatball or meat patty or meatloaf, something like that, you have a great way to start sneaking nutrients in. And you can puree them. You can start with the sweeter ones like butternut squash, so they don't even really know that they're in there. And then we can work our way up. You can freeze them into little ice cube trays and just pull them out when you need them. You can actually cook your grains or your pasta or whatever, your gluten-free pasta, in all sorts of broths, a homemade vegetable broth, a homemade mineral or bone broth, those types of things, because you can absorb some of those nutrients in it. You can make nettles, and they usually have them in dried form, and you can make a tea, or you can add those to your stock, and nettles have a wonderful array of different nutrients. Seaweeds are another one. They help the digestibility of beans, so you can put them in there. They also impart all sorts of trace minerals when you cook them and simmer them in soups and various other foods. Juicing, this is another great way, and for kids that love to drink but don't like to chew, especially kids that maybe have sensory issues, if you ever think about how loud it is to chew a potato chip or something, if you have a sensory issue, kids gravitate either only crunchy foods or no crunchy foods or whatever that might be. And they might, in some cases, I have kids that only really like to drink. And so, well, we don't want them drinking fruit juice all day long because of all the sugar in it. So instead, we can use some vegetable juices. We can get a juicer and juice some wonderful vegetables, such as some of the more mild things like cucumber or celery or fennel. You know, we can add a little bit if we need to sweeten it up, a little bit of carrot, a little bit of green apple, maybe even a little bit of something sweeter like a little bit of pear. And then you can, from there, over time, start to add a little bit more of the green ones in, like kale or whatever that might be. And so this, since digestion isn't always so great, by juicing them, you're getting access to all those nutrients, and they don't need to chew everything and digest everything as well as they might otherwise. So juicing can be a really great way. You can, if your child won't drink a vegetable juice, you can add a little splash of it to some fruit juice. You can start with a little fruit juice, water it down, add a little splash of vegetable juice. You can add a little bit of the juice to some sauce that you're making. Any way you can try to start getting that in is really helpful. And you can, if you tend to need to give supplements, and fruit juice is the common thing, you may start to be able to give it with vegetable juice. And just like all of us, I don't know if you've ever had this experience yourself, but sometimes it takes a while to warm up to some of these foods. So you might want to start with more fruit juice, but with the goal in mind that you're going to eliminate the fruit juice and get more and more into the vegetable juices. And I know lots of kids that love juices. So going into these nuts and seeds and things, so I mentioned at the beginning soy and the oxalates, phytates, and lectins, these inflammatory compounds. Well, they really exist on all seeds. Anything in nature that's a seed, a bean is a seed, a nut is a seed, a grain is a seed. We want to break down those inhibitors. Those are strong digestive inhibitors. And so we want to break those down and reduce that inflammatory process. So what we want to do is mimic the germination process, because if in nature, if a seed lands on the cement, if it germinated right there, it would die. So it waits until it gets to a soil where it's slightly a little bit acidic, slightly warm and wet and a little bit moist. And so when we soak our grains and our nuts and our beans, we release a bunch of those digestive inhibitors, we activate the enzymes, we really release a lot of the ability to have access to those nutrients, and we reduce a lot of the inflammatory properties that go along with it. So the way I do that is often recommend, you're gonna soak it in water, but if you wanna get a little more specific, you can soak grains in water with a little bit of something acidic, like if you were doing dairy, you might do whey. That's a pretty common one to use, whey. But if you're dairy-free, you could use a little bit of lemon juice, a little bit of vinegar, or some other substance like that. If you're soaking beans, I often do it with something slightly little alkalines, like a big pinch of baking soda.